ticket for Dick and Jack.
Okay. That'll be $12.
We are going to have a quick question and answer session.
Where was it all filmed, John?
It was filmed mostly on Roosevelt Island, and a little bit, as you knew, from right in front of Union Station. We simulated the hallways as being the White House, but mostly here in New York City. My comments, every time I see it, I dislike certain parts better, and then I like them again. And what I'm struck by this time is I'm convinced that it's so much more than about Richard Nixon and Jack Kennedy. It's about the phenomenon of fathers and sons, how we as particularly American sons pine and strive for our father's approval, his affection, seeing him as a model. And I believe this film is very much about that. And I took the examples of Dick and Jack because they were such beautiful examples of two men who were so controlled by their father, good and bad. And of course you can expand those comparisons by talking Obama, who wrote a book called Dreams from My Father. You can talk about Hillary and Donald Trump in the first debate. They made reference to their fathers, Frank Trump and Mr. Clinton, not Clinton, Rodham. So fathers are very much part of our landscape.
So I have a question, actually, a few. So the first is for John. Since this is your first foray into cinema, outside of actually writing, painting, screenwriting for the theater, how did you find your transition to the big screen?
How did I've been more a painter all my life than a writer, but I began to write on my watercolors, and after a while I wanted them not read but spoken. And so that was the next step, from painting to writing to, and what is not the most quintessential experience of seeing something of language in motion is film. And so that's what brought me here. And so this was for me an invitation and an exploration of I guess the next chapter. And I introduced my painting, as you can see. That was Joe's garden. So I'm trying in some sense to combine or bridge those different experiences.
So for the cast, and quite frankly at this point, after I've rewatched it for the past 2 days, I think John's Nostradamus at this point. And the reason I say that is due to the current political climate and everything that's actually discussed in the film. And this isn't a political, I'm not making a political statement whatsoever, but if anybody watched the first debates this week, now Kennedy and Nixon participated in the first televised debate ever. Kennedy prepared, Nixon did not, and he did very, very poorly. So I guess my question is in regards to the current climate, the movie, and how do you think that the cast as a whole in our social media world that we live in 140 characters or less, how do you think this would actually play out in today's realm, in today's political machinations of what are actually going on? That's for Cass, not John.
Why are you looking at me?
Yeah. You can start, Ken, by all means.
All right. Microphone. All right. Well, I would say the more things change, the more they stay the same. I see, a lot of relevance in the movie I just watched and the debate I watched Monday night.
Nostradamus.
So,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nonverbal demeanor cues that that when John writes about Jack being prepared for a television interview and knowing that the camera's always on you, and certainly we see that in a lot of debates, but for some reason, some people don't learn, and others do. But I think that we were talking about this the other day, that the debate really showed how I think the audience especially will watch how somebody reacts or pretends to listen, and kind of, spend more of their time creating their rebuttal than listening. And in that, they have a kind of a negative nonverbal demeanor, which has a negative outcome.
I'm curious about the symbolism of the hair in the beginning of the piece, and what that represented for you, John, and why you used a black barber to sort of manipulate that.
Oh, well, for me, hair is cosmetic. If you have any, you use it hopefully to your advantage. It's a form of veiling, disguising. I could have used anything, but I thought appropriate. I do know that presidents have their haircuts in the White House barbershop in the basement. So I took that idea, and then I thought, well, everybody could come and get their haircut. And that's why I tried to show with the different portraits coming. Every time that someone came in, their portrait went up, because everybody's a candidate. Everybody's hustling for this supreme position. Why a black barber? I don't know. Robert?
Why not?
Yeah, why not? I did some research on that, and I can't remember the exact barber's name, but yeah, it wasn't a black barber. But some of the things that I was given, if you saw, there was a head on the table, and at that time I was a phrenologist, and that's what Joe would talk about. This seat behind my ear. It's the point of my compassion, etc. So, and I had some, some magical lines there.
Manipulation.
The things that I would say about, when we were playing cards, I said I'm going to give him a bold new haircut, because that's going to fit with this new, in the manner to which Joe was going to reframe him and reshape him. So I saw everything through haircuts.
Well, you were the psychiatrist.
Yes.
You were
listening
to all of the intimate points that each person that sat in that chair and dispensing advice.
That's an excellent point. And at some point I felt that they were soliciting me. They wanted to bounce certain things off me. That's the way I interpreted that.
I was wondering to what extent you had actually researched the relationships that they each had with their respective fathers, or how much of this was imagined. And then for all of you, I'm wondering if in acting this, I don't know how many of you have sons, but to what extent did acting in this elicit new thoughts, feelings about your being fathers and or sons? So.
For the first part, I've read as much as I could, and I used my imagination. I wanted to turn the 1960s on its head by, we all know that the Kennedys were mistrustful of Nixon, and Nixon was terrified of the Kennedys. What if we created a situation where Joe Kennedy becomes Richard Nixon's father and helps him to win the presidency in 1968, which, as you know, he did, but not necessarily with Kennedy's help. So I'm reminded, I hope, that this is a comedy, and I wanted that kind of irony to come through, that without having a father, can you find one? And if you can find one, is he compatible in terms of your objectives? And as you could see at the end, he didn't need Joe anymore, and he won. So LBJ didn't exist. Kennedy was not assassinated. He had 2 terms. Dick had his turn. But as far as the actors, it's a good question.
I'll take a pass at it. I'm a father and a son. And so I went through various phases of my relationship with my father, and I've gone through various phases of my relationship with my son. First he's your father, and then he becomes your brother, and then ultimately he became my son. And now I'm going through where I was the father, and now he's kind of like my brother. So I definitely am aware of all of those different changes and relationships, and it weighed very heavy on me. And I tried to bring that to the interpretation, those different phases, because they're all very consequential and very important. You're a father.
I am a father of 2 grown boys. I have a slightly different relationship with them than I have with you in the film. But Frank Nixon was a very tough guy. He had 5 sons, and Richard was the second one, but 2 died of tuberculosis, and he was very much affected by that. And he was fairly abusive. He was very much the hardcore, salt of the earth Republican, earn everything on your own, don't take any handouts, don't trust anybody. And he went from job to job to job. I mean, he went from Ohio out to California, and was a farmhand and worked as a roustabout in the oil business, and had a lemon grove, and failed. He failed in all those things. But he was a very proud man. And at the end of his life, he ended up finally opening up an Atlantic Richfield gas station with a supermarket. And then they just barely got by, and I think that the sons grew up very poor, and as a result became very resourceful. And it was just that, he was a Methodist originally, and he became a Quaker. And in Whittier, there was a Quaker community there. So he had his faith, and he really believed in America. Very different from the Kennedys, and I think hated the Kennedys. Hated everything they represent, Eastern establishment, money, new money, privilege, very much the celebrities, and he was like the hardcore, almost, party of Lincoln.
I just would like to say the scene where we were playing cards. He has this line. He goes into that speech. Those are some good lines. I can't get it right. I love I love what big hate gives you. You can hate hard, and when I look at it, I can't. I just have to just laugh.
Hate forever.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of the writing is blended in truth, though, I think, to your question, that John did a lot of research, and so therefore we did a lot of research as well. So a lot of these stories, I think one of the things that was interesting and poignant to me is that Nixon actually did turn off and on lights and open doors and things like that in that hallway, and that Joe has a huge impact on the entire Nixon family. I didn't realize to the extent, but there's some really interesting stories if you go deeper into that. But for myself, as far as father figure, I really didn't have one, and I think that you can choose one, and there's a lot of different father figures. As Tennessee Williams said, fathers shape our lives more than our mothers. And so this guy, we did have a chance to rehearse before we did the movie, and so we sort of established a relationship, and he grabbed my head a lot. So.
And your face.
And he really did. He actually cut my hair.
Would you repeat the question? What is the question?
So she's asking about, in terms of the idea of fathers and sons, and the implication in the film. What about your own life? Do you, are you a father? And does that have an impact on how you research the film?
Well, my dad died when I was very young. I was 7. And I always sensed that I missed the formation of my identity. I think that's part of why I like acting, because I can, be whoever I want. But I always had a vague sense of identity. it's said that a mother's love is unconditional. You know, the guy kills the 17 people and the mother's in a courtroom saying, oh, he's a good boy, you know. Mother just loves you because she gave birth to you. But a father's love is conditional. Father has rules and regulations. You got to measure up. You got to toe the line. And I think that's instilled. Jack has a line, I vie with my siblings for dad's approval. You know, everybody wants dad's approval. It's very important. And so it's a burden in a way to have to, you know, measure up to dad's approval. Now, because I didn't have a dad, for a while I replaced him with God in heaven. He was my father. You know, I remember I prayed, dear Father in heaven, dear Father in heaven. And then because I didn't have a solid image of what it meant to be a man, I sort of took on the cultural badges. You know, I lifted weights and I played football and I swaggered around and tried to seduce every girl in sight to prove I was a real man. But underneath I was a kind of, you know, little kid trying to find out who am I really, you know. And I think that's something we all do throughout life. What we're all striving for is to really be who we are. Try to find out who that is and be who we are. And it's so confusing because we're presented with all these images that we're supposed to live up to. And sometimes the image becomes more important than the reality. That's part of one of the themes in the movie, I think. Identity, real identity versus the image. And sometimes I think people get confused. You know, am I my image or what am I really, you know? So for me, that's a big thing what the play is about is these guys. Everybody wants to have a sense of self-worth. You know, that's a psychological need. Goethe, the German philosopher, said, the worst thing that can befall a person is that they should come to think ill of themselves. And when people do really think they loathe themselves, they often what? Boom, they do themselves in, right? So we're all striving for a sense of personal worth, personal identity. You know, we're constantly, am I as smart as this guy, or am I as pretty as that girl, or am I as seductive, or whatever, you know? And it's a constant struggle. And that's what these guys are doing, you know, they're vying and struggling and trying to prove that they have worth. They're real men. Joe Kennedy was a very extraordinary guy. I mean, this guy was brilliant. He had all kinds of ways. He was a money-making machine. I remember one story, he was hired to, he was like a vice president of operations in some factory, and they decided that they had to provide lunches for the men. So he started a food service business right away and negotiated a contract and was providing all the meals and making a ton of money doing that, as well as being paid a good salary for being, you know, vice president of whatever. In Hollywood, he was feared. He was a takeover artist and a master negotiator. He had tremendous stamina. Guy would work 80, 90 hours a week. Very little sleep. He was indefatigable. Brilliant, industrious, charming, a great seducer of women, supposedly had hundreds of affairs. Waitresses, models, movie stars, you know, Gloria Swanson supposedly was his... well, I'm going on. I'm just expressing my thoughts about what this is all about. I thought it was a wonderful script. It was very poetical. When I first read it, I said, "How am I going to wrap my tongue around these words?" But as I got into it, it just kind of like it was like Shakespeare almost. You know, it just elevated me, and I felt, yeah, this is saying something. You know, and I. You know, there's a saying, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. See, it all begins with the script. Got a great script, inspiring script, and it was wonderful to play the part and work with these terrific actors here. I think the cast is terrific. I hope you agree. What did you think of the whole thing?